I could see from Sir Polkinghorne's talk that science and religion can kind of plod along happily in their separate paradigms without coming to blows necessarily. But what happens when there are theological tenets that seem to directly conflict science? I'm thinking in particular of, as I understand Christianity, the fall was what led to the fact that humans die ultimately, and it's necessary for people to die. It's part of the whole Christian picture. And yet scientists, it was a Reith lecture a few years ago where the speaker said that we'll be the last generation to die or the first generation to live forever, and scientists are moving to the point with their research into DNA that they reckon they could stop aging and enable organisms to live forever. And if science reached that point with humans, and it was demonstrated, say, in a laboratory that that was possible to do with other mammals, then you have a real conflict between the two, because theology sort of treading on the feet of scientific development, as it were. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I have several things, if I may, in reply to that. I think that we have every reason to believe that scientific questions will receive scientific answers, and indeed that theological questions will receive theological answers. In that sense, there is a separation between the two. But the way they answer their questions has to fit together in a way that is consonant with each other. I mean, let me take a human illustration. The cup of tea is, the kettle is boiling because I want to make a cup of tea. The kettle is boiling because the gas heats the water. That's, the second one is a scientific answer. The first one is the answer in terms of purpose, analogies to theological thinking. I don't have to choose between the two. They're compatible with each other. But if I said to you, I'm going to make a cup of tea, and I put the kettle in the refrigerator, then you would think there's something funny going on. So how theology answers its questions and how science answers its questions must be in some sort of consonant relationship with each other. And it's unquestionable, I think, that theologians have thought differently about the doctrine of creation, how they express the doctrine of creation post-Darwin than they did before Darwin. I mean, that's just a fact, it seems to me.
I'd just like to add that projects for extending human lifespan are often even more efficient at getting financial backing than they are at delivering results. But even if, for example, it were possible to extend human lifespan for 1,000 years, or even 10,000 years, from a scientific point of view, there's no doubt that eventually, you know, the Earth will be destroyed, the sun will blow up, and indeed, regrettably, there's not much reason to believe that humans are necessarily going to be smart enough to carry on indefinitely. So, extending human lifespan by a bit, you know, from a God's eye point of view, from a scientific point of view, where we've got a universe which is about 13 or 14 billion years old, it doesn't really matter very much whether it's sort of 70 years or 700 years. And I think we need to be a little bit cautious about, you know, rather optimistic claims that death is going to become optional.
I'll just quickly say, I think you need to be even more cautious in these grandiose scientific speculative series. A chap I knew a little bit, a great physicist, was Wolfgang Pauli, who had a very sharp tongue. He used to wag his finger at people and say, no credits for the future. Don't tell me it's all going to work out in the end. Work it out now.
So I'd like to refer to Nicholas Beale's example of the air molecules. So it seems that one can't know the position of every molecule, but I think according to Boltzmann, one can know what proportion of those molecules have a minimum certain energy. So I just wanted to use that example as maybe inquire about how, you know, properties of systems do emerge from sort of what seems to be sort of random occurrences, and whether you think maybe those kind of emergent properties indicate there is some kind of order and, you know, godlike perhaps structure to the universe.
Yes, I mean, you've put your finger on two very important issues. First of all, as you say, absolutely, statistical mechanics does allow you to make very, very good statistical predictions about what will happen with randomly acting or semi-randomly acting assemblages of individual molecules. And in fact, it turns out that the limit of quantum mechanics is, in a sense, statistical mechanics. And then, of course, at a bigger scale, in a lot of systems, statistical mechanics can become, you know, the billiard balls that we see in the macro world. But When you have a system where very small changes can be amplified, then you get this sort of really interesting chaotic dynamics, and you can't get away from the statistical nature of the phenomena that you're discussing. But your second point about emerging order is absolutely right and fundamental, that in ways which we're only beginning to understand, you can have apparent disorder at one level, which then at a higher level of organization becomes order, and where the higher level of organization has properties which are completely distinct from the properties at the lower level. There's a very great systems biologist called Dennis Noble, who's written a wonderful book called The Music of Life. And he has a principle which he calls the principle of biological relativity. It's actually not in the book, it's in some subsequent writings, where he says there is no fundamental level in biology. It's not as though you can always reduce biology to molecules. Or, you know, if that were true, you could also reduce molecules to atoms and atoms to electrons and quarks. Nobody in their right mind would try and understand the behavior of human beings on the basis of the physics of quarks. And in fact, in biology and in living systems, these higher level systems always influence the lower levels and vice versa. So you can't begin to understand what's going on if you imagine that one level is fundamental and the others are just sort of epiphenomena. And in practice, you always have to understand things sort of middle out. You need to pick the appropriate level for thinking about what's happening, be aware that there are higher level phenomena and lower level phenomena and sideways phenomena, but don't imagine that you can totally reduce. And that, I think, is a good statement of where modern biology is going, and it's really a fact about life that people got somewhat seduced away from because of the big successes of molecular biology over the last 30 or 40 years.
Just a remark about system mechanics. System mechanics is based on the insight that the most probable state, when you have 10 to the 23 molecules, is overwhelmingly most probable. But it is not, of course, inevitable. It's possible that all the air molecules in this room might move over here to the left. You would have to sit there a long time before you saw it happen. But it's not impossible.
I just had a domestic example of what you were talking about was actually my family packing the car to go on holiday, where total chaos eventually produced a higher order packing of the car, and we were able to, one despaired at times, but eventually off we went on holiday.
You're acting as Maxwell Demons in that case.